The following is intended for mature audiences only. Discretion is advised.
Thank you so much for downloading this episode of So What Do You Really Do, the podcast where I, your host, DEADAIR Dennis Maller, interviews artists and entertainers about their day jobs, and the artist and or entertainer, or in this case both, that is joining me on the program today is cruise ship comedian Scott Henry. Scott and I met through Clubhouse. We have actually not technically met because we haven't seen each other in person. We only know each other virtually, which a lot of my guests recently have become people who are pandemic friends, as I've been calling them. So it's nice that this is the good thing about the pandemic, is that I'm interacting with people that I never probably would have had a chance to interact with because we weren't near each other. We weren't in the same place. We weren't meeting face to face because of whatever's going on. But I'm meeting people because of Zoom, Clubhouse. In this case, it is Clubhouse, and other platforms and social media and stuff. But so, yeah, I joined Clubhouse. Let's see here. It's May of 2022 when we're releasing this episode. Clubhouse, I joined, I want to say it was January of 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic, towards the end of the pandemic, somewhere in the pandemic. I'm still confused at where we're at, and it's definitely not over, but it's so far from the beginning, I'm not sure where we're at in it, or when anything was in it, other than, the entire time was depression. That was the only thing that I knew about it. Anyway, I joined Clubhouse, and of course we'll talk about this on the show, but just give you all an introduction, or a little background. I joined Clubhouse in January. I wanted to try and really get into what this app was. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't like it at first, but what really turned me around was Scott Henry, his wife Catherine, and their club on Clubhouse, which was called, at the time, Comedy HQ. It's now called the Big Comedy Network. And we'll talk about this. There's an announcement. I'll announce it now, even though it's not quite properly announced. But this podcast, So What Do You Really Do, is joining the Big Comedy Network. Reason we haven't made the official announcement is because, well, we're having some technical issues transferring myself into their system, but it's going to happen. And they could not have been nicer and more complimentary and more of a big fan and supporter of me. And it's great. But they're the reason that I stayed on Clubhouse. Previous episode with Philip Wilburn, you will hear me say the same thing. It was because of the Comedy Lounge, Big Comedy Network, that I found like-minded people, a group of people I wanted to be around, people I wanted to constantly come back to and talk with and hang out and listen to. And that's what the pandemic brought. That was the only good thing about the pandemic, is I got to interact with people from across the country internationally. I got to interact with people internationally. I had a lot of sit-down Zoom chats with comedians from India and listening to what they're going through over there. They're literally getting arrested. Not they. One, apparently. But comedians in India are literally getting arrested for comedy, and to hear somebody talk about, what it's like to live through that. Meanwhile, we're here like, oh, I'm worried some redneck's going to come up and slap me in the face for me telling an offensive joke. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. All right. I can go on for hours about the amount of comedians who are like, oh, I can't wait to Krav Maga some heckler who's going to come attack me on stage. I'm like, you're the person that got picked on in school, and you claim that's the reason why you're on stage telling jokes. Maybe calm down there, Chuck Norris. Anyway, huge distraction. Sorry. But yeah, Scott Henry and his wife Catherine are super nice and wonderful and just so accepting and amazing. And I'm really glad to be a part of the Big Comedy Network. When it's official, which, paperwork has been signed. It's official enough for me, but we haven't made the announcement, which that will be coming soon once we get past some of these technical errors. And if you follow me on social media, you'll probably see that I live in a world of technical errors. Anyway, on that note, one of the things I wanted to talk to Scott about, besides the impetus behind creating the Big Comedy Network, was more, he is a comedian who does cruise ships. And that is something I find interesting because you hear a lot of derogatory talk from comedians about it. It's being a cruise ship comedian is almost a punchline. Scott loves it. And we get in deep about what it is to be a cruise ship comedian, to be a comedian on these ships. And I find it fascinating because it sounds like fun to me. It sounds like the road, only you're not physically traveling. And of course the road sounds fun to me, but so many comedians that I talk to talk about how it's a lonely place and how it's rough and traveling. And I was like, probably because I don't do a lot. I don't do a lot of travel, but when I have the opportunity to travel, I enjoy it. I find the hustle and bustle to be enjoyable. Now, granted, it does suck when I don't have time, or the fact that I'm on a plane is just a loss of time. Like, there's not much you can do on a plane. Like, let's talk about a lot of the video and audio editing I do as both a source of income and for this and our sponsor of today's show, Word of the Day with Comedians. Yes, my other podcast. Word of the Day Comedians, where a comedian and I get together, we pick a word, we make fun of it, and create the most funniest absurd sentence we can using it in context. It's the funniest way to expand your vocabulary, and it's available on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube as an actual video YouTube show. Check out Word of the Day on Comedians today after you listen to this podcast. But yeah, so when I'm on a plane or driving on the road, if I was, traveling, which I did before the pandemic a little bit, that's just downtime. That's loss of time. There's nothing you can do while you're traveling. Now, granted, I could put everything on a laptop, sit on a plane and edit audio and edit video on a laptop. I don't have the money to buy a laptop that can, in addition to my desktop computer that I do all my work on, I don't have the money to buy a laptop to do just that with, especially one that's going to be able to handle that capability. But that is an option. But how much time do you really get to work? I mean, if I'm driving, zero time to work. I can't edit a podcast or video or a vlog or YouTube show or anything and drive. Maybe I can join up with another person maybe and let them drive while I work. But I'm not a headlining comedian and I can't be affording to hire someone to open for me. And no one's hiring me to be the passenger / opening act. Not yet, at least. Maybe that'll be down the road. But, it still sounds like fun and interesting to me. However, lots of time, downtime at the hotel. You work what? What's the old adage? We work 1 hour a night, 2 hours a night. And then I have the whole rest of the day to fill. But, like I said, all that sounds fun and interesting to me. It's just a matter of getting able to do those things. So, Scott doesn't do any of those things, but he does have a life. He does write. I was fascinated to hear about his writing process as someone who is traveling and working and being on cruise ships and stuff like that. I was fascinated. We talked about that. You'll hear all about it. I find it fun and interesting. I assume you do as well. That's why I ask these questions, because I feel like you are coming here because you find the same things that I find fascinating, or you're looking for something to be fascinated with, and that's what I'm providing with you. And without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with cruise ship comedian and now Comedy Network founder, Scott Henry.
All right, ready when you are, man.
You know what? Let me open this because I was thinking about this today. I'm not the kind of person that easily answers the question, hey, how are you doing? I can't just say fine. I have to tell people everything that's going on with me, whether they want to hear it or not, because I want to hear how other people are doing. If there's things going wrong, things going bad, I want your honest answer. I don't want somebody to go, it's fine when everything's not fine. But then I overshare and I turn people off.
Oh, that's funny.
As for you, who's someone when you're on the cruise ships and you see the guest over and over, do you yourself have a standard reply to when you're walking past guests and like, hey, what's up? Or past the staff and like, how are you doing? Do you just have a standard go-to, oh, it is what it is or whatever? Or are you like me, an oversharer with strangers that you're trapped with for a week at a time?
Yeah, no, I always am just try to be organic. I just try to be organic, like, hey, how you doing? And just, they're nice enough to come up and say that they enjoyed the show. Then, I try to give them the time of day. I just try to answer as honestly as possible. It's like, it's like dealing with hecklers, the more organic it is, then the better it is, rather than a made up line or something like that.
That's good to know, because I grew up in the service industry. I started, waiting tables, bar backing, bartending, stuff like that. And I have this natural inclination that when I walk past people, just to smile and say, hey, how you doing? Because when you're walking through a restaurant, you look at the other guests and they're sitting at their tables like, hey, how's everything? How are you doing? Even if it's not your table, you just still feel obligated. I do, to just greet other guests like, hey, how's everything going? How you doing? You like that mentality. And I can't imagine me having to bring that kind of attitude to a cruise ship where I'm seeing the same 3,000 some people every day for a week straight and just be like walking around the ship going, hey, everybody, hey, how you doing? I feel like you're the kind of guy that would just like, oh, I'm just going to be low key. I'm just going to go about my business. I'm not going to acknowledge that I'm a staff member. I'm just like, is that your attitude when you're walking around the ship? It's like, hey, I'm just going to be Scott, just another person on the ship until they realize I'm the comedian for the boat. Or do you treat them like you're a crew member and you're like, yeah, I was going to say, I don't think you're the, hey, I feel like I'm part of the crew kind of guy.
I don't feel like I'm not part of anything. I just exist. I honestly, I really do. I just walk around. We're guest entertainers. That's what they call us, guest entertainers, which means we're an entertainer, but we're also a guest, which means we don't have to wear a name tag. We don't have to do anything like that. We can just walk around. And, in the first few days, you're pretty unrecognizable. And then as the week goes on, people start recognizing, but it's okay. It's not like, people are very rarely is anybody like a pain in the ass. You know what I mean? They're usually just like, hey, sorry to interrupt. I just want to say I enjoyed your show, or, so you can't hate somebody for that.
Well, that's good. Cause we've all dealt with, comedians. We've all dealt with people leaving at the end of the night. You're standing by the door hoping somebody will say they really liked your show, or they'll buy a piece of merch, or, they'll just say something nice to you as you're walking out. But then I can't imagine having to have that same kind of attitude for 6-7 days straight, where you're just like hoping somebody's going to be like, hey, I saw the show last night. Hello. Some people may be annoyed by that. I don't know how I would feel about it, because I definitely sit there at the end of the show going, please, somebody say they liked me. Please, somebody said they liked me.
Yeah, I'm 100 years past that. if you liked me, you liked me. If you didn't like me, that's okay too. Comedy's subjective. I always say that's why they call it a sense of humor. Some people don't sense it.
All right, well, let's go backwards and start talking about, because I'm really fascinated by the whole cruise ship entertainer thing in general, not just comedians, just like the people they put on cruise ships. Because a couple of years ago, this is when this kind of occurred to me, that how strange this business is. A couple of years ago, I was getting hired by this guy to do comedy in these apartment buildings. And I think he really missed the boat by not calling it condo comedy. He called it like comedy mafia or some dumb name that didn't make sense. But so I found out.
Was it like in a pasta place? That's comedy mafia.
So I would go and I would open up for another comedian. And then one or two times I kind of headlined them myself, but not really. So I'd go in. Would be in the convention, or not the convention, but like the common room of these really mostly high-end apartment buildings and condos and stuff. And I'd come in, and most of them would look and go, deliveries are around back. But the other, when they would realize that I'm the entertainer, we go into these common rooms and everybody comes down from rooms and we do comedy from it. And it's very much, it feels so much like the court jester, performing for the lords and ladies of the court. It's very, very weird, but fun, rewarding, and, made some money doing it. And that's when I realized that these apartment buildings, these high-end ones, have to find things to do to entertain their residents. So every month they have some kind of like pizza party, ice cream social, comedians. They have DJs come in and do all these things. And that's a whole set of business for that industry that I have to imagine is tenfold for a cruise ship, because a cruise ship is like a typical. How long's a typical cruise for guests? A week, 2 weeks?
7 days usually. Every cruise line has different, amount of days cruises. So that's poor English. But what I could tell you is that sometimes it's a 3-day cruise, right? They'll just go down to the Bahamas. They'll cruise down to the Bahamas. They'll go like Royal Caribbean has this thing. It's an island called Coco Cay. And they bought this little island many years ago. I was going there when you had to tender in, and so it was, there was nothing there. And then they spent $500 million putting up one of the best water parks ever. They have a gigantic wave pool. They have, I don't know how many pools. They have cabanas and stuff. So what people will do is they'll get on in like Florida and they'll cruise down into the Bahamas and maybe stop in Nassau, Bahamas one day. And then the next day they'll do Coco Cay, stay there all day. And then they'll make their way back to Florida, either Miami or Port Canaveral. And that's it. And so it's a 3-day cruise, but most of them are 7 days. Okay. There's some 5-dayers, but the longer the cruise, the older the crowds. Okay. So if there's a 14-day cruise, you're going to hear some Velcro shoes. And if there's a 21-day cruise, then there's probably going to be 3 or 4 deaths on the cruise.
Well, that's what's fascinating is like they have to plan all kinds of entertainment for people over a multiple day period. And I got to imagine that it's difficult for them to try and find different acts because I don't know, for you as a comedian, you're not doing the same show. Yeah, if it's a 7-day cruise, you're not doing the same show 7 days over and over. Are you? Like, I'm assuming you're performing maybe once, twice the whole week? Or what's the typical schedule for a comedian?
It's all different. There's some cruise ships. Let's just say I'm going to work one of Royal Caribbean's smaller ships, right? They're still big, but smaller ships, like 3,000, 3,500, something like that. You fly on in the middle of a cruise, okay? And when you're in the middle of the cruise, that night or the next night, you'll do your late show, which is like a 35 to 40 minute, adult comedy show in the theater. Then like a day or two later, it'll be the farewell show for that cruise, right? So I'll go up and do about 15 to 18 minutes of different material for that show. Then the next day, everybody will get off of the ship. All new people will get on the ship. And then that night, I'll do a welcome aboard show, which is like 15, 18 minutes. And then a night or two later, I'll do an adult show in the theater. And then the next day, I fly off. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is Royal Caribbean has these big ships. They're in the Oasis class. They're gigantic. They have 6,500 passengers and about 4,500 crew. And they have a comedy club on there. And we used to do 14 shows in a week.
What?
14. And now they're doing like 9. But they're only 25 minutes long, and different people come every night. Rarely do people come 2, 3, 4 times, because you could, I change up my material, but it's only 25 minutes. So I can do, 3, 4, different shows. And so you have that, which I like. I like doing 9 or 10 shows because I like to work. I'm out there to try and write material. And then so you do 9 shows, 25-minute shows, different nights. Some nights you have 2 shows. Some nights you have no shows, and some nights 1 show. So then on Norwegian cruise lines for the management company Levity.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
And they also have all the comedy clubs. They bought up all the improvs called Levity Live. So they have their branding on the ships, on like, I think 8 or 9 of the ships. It's called Levity Live on the NCL cruise lines. And they have a comedy club. And so I'll do 40 minutes in there of like family friendly. So there's like 6-year-olds in the audience, and and it's ridiculous, but it is what it is. So you have to do 40 minutes in front of like kids and parents, but kids in the front row. And then, a couple nights later, we do a completely different 40-minute set of adult material. So that's basically what you do. So you kind of have to have about an hour and a half of material that you can do half of it in front of kids and the other half, it doesn't matter.
I always hear people talk about cruise lines, nobody in depth, but you hear that, yeah, you end up doing like clean shows. And then somebody was like, oh yeah, no, we do adult shows too. And I'm like, I figured all it is just you're doing 1 hour clean for people a couple times through the thing maybe. But it's interesting to hear that there's a whole club. So I'm guessing the club show is a traditional host feature headliner.
Yeah.
So there's possibly 3. Like, how many comedians would be on a cruise together?
On the small ships on Royal, 1.
Okay.
On the big ships on Royal, 2. On the Levity Live ships on NCL, 2 comics. And what those 2 comics do is they used to have an MC and 2 headliners. Okay, so then the MC would have to do all these shows, like 14 shows, because, they'd put an MC out there, he'd do like 10, or he or she would do 10 or 12 minutes, and then bring the headliner out and he'd do 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, right? But now they eliminated the MC because probably budget reasons, and, it costs more to fly in another person, and they weren't at full strength for quite a while, so they're trying to save a little money. So now it's just me and the other comic, but I do my show, and then like the next night he'll do his show, and we'll do that. But in total, probably do 5 or 6 shows that week each.
Okay, all right, that's interesting to hear, because that's definitely different than the way the rest of the comedy business runs. It's weird that cruise lines, it creates that kind of different thing. Like, you've done corporate private events and stuff like that, and I know you've walked into a private comedy booking, and they're like, all right, so we would like you to do this, and this, and you're like, yeah, that's not how comedy shows work. Let me go out there and just do my jokes, or I've gotten them like from Gig Salad or Gig Masters or one of those dumb things. They're like, hey, we want you to come out, and then can you do like 10 minutes before the bridal shower, and then do like 15 minutes after the bridal shower, and we want you to hang out and walk around. And you're like, no, I just want to come in here and give you my 30 minutes of jokes, and then you hand me a check. So it's interesting that cruise lines are taking the model that you're used to and changing the format around.
Well, they have to for what they're doing. They used to just do, only clean stuff, but they had to get rid of that. You know what I mean? Because people were complaining. They're like, hey, I don't want to go to a comedy show with 8-year-olds in the front row. I don't, and that was actually one of the cruise lines. I'm not going to say which one, but one of the cruise lines did not want to do adult shows. Like when they, how do I do this? When they started doing comedy in a certain way, I was talking to the entertainment director, and he's like, you've been doing this a long time. Are we going about this the right way and everything else? And I said, yeah, it's all good. And he was like, well, we want to do more shows. And I go, don't do more shows. And he goes, well, people love comedy. I go, yeah, that's great. I said, but here's a glass of Coke. All right. Just take a swig of that Coke. Takes a swig of the Coke, right? I go, okay, now I'm going to pour some water in it. Now try it again. You go, yeah, it's not that good. Okay, now I'm going to put a bunch of water in there. How's it taste? And I'm like, doesn't taste good, right? It was metaphorical. And I said, all the comics have the same amount of material, okay? They're not going to write an extra half hour because you need it. So all they're going to do is stall. All they're going to do is stretch their material. So you're not getting any more comedy. All you're doing is taking down the level of the comedy, right? Because, corporate people, they don't, it's not that they don't understand. They don't, but it's not just that. It's that a lot of times they don't want to understand. They don't give a fuck. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of hold your ground. Like, they didn't want to do adult shows either. And I was like, you got to do adult shows. And he's like, oh, we don't like to do that. We don't want to tell people they can't bring their kids. I'm like, I said, listen, dude, nobody wants to be at a comedy show with kids. I said, they'll do it because they're, forced to. It's at 8:00. I go, but adults want adult material shows. And he goes, I don't think we're going to do that. I go, well, pay attention to those comment cards, and I'll bet you in the next, 5 or 6 months, you're going to have to switch up. And he did. Mm. And they switched up. And so people love the adult comedy. I mean, people realize what a challenge it is to do comedy. Like I always say, I'll come to a comedy show, and it's never ceases to amaze me how ignorant people are. We're getting ready to do a show. There's 200 people in the room. There's 5 kids in the front row. So I come up and I go, how old are you? Kid's like 6. Okay, how old are you? I'm 8. And you? 9. And you? 11. Huh. A 6, 8, 9, and 11-year-old in a front row at a comedy show. Solid parenting right there, buddy. That is really thoughtful. Maybe you guys should throw some dice after this. Have some Irish car bombs. You know what I mean? Who doesn't like those? And it's because it's stupid. That's what it is. You know what I mean? If you think that bringing your kid to a comedy show that's 6 years old and sit him in the front row is a good idea, you're wrong. And so, but they do it anyway because they're like, oh, that'll be fun. The comedian will jack with them. And I do, dude. I tear these kids apart. You know, it's so fun.
Yeah, I've done a couple of these condo gigs where there's a kid. Luckily, only like 2 or 3 people bring their kids down. And you make some jokes with it. And I've been asked to do a couple, because I list myself as a clean comedian. I could do 20, 30 minutes clean. But here's the problem with it is, it's not kid material. It's material I could say that people are going to laugh at and then kids are going to hear and they're not going to get offended or get bad ideas by. But the kids aren't going to find any of it funny.
Yeah. They're not going to get it.
They're not going to get it. I'm not a clown. And that's, I think, what a lot of people misconstrue when they see clean comedian. And they're like, oh, a comedian will tell jokes that my kid's going to like. They're expecting somebody goofy to come out and like fall down and squirt people with a flower and stuff. And it's like, no, I'm not a clown. I'm a comedian. I say things. I'm thought-provoking. I'm trying to provoke thoughts of laughter out of you. Like, I'm not that highbrow. I'm just trying to say things that'll make you laugh. But yeah, kids aren't going to be on that level of cerebralism. Even puns. Kids don't even get puns. That's, I mean, I can imagine if you're bringing kids on a cruise ship, there's nobody to babysit the kids. So it's like you're dragging the kids along with you.
Oh, there is places for them. There's daycare centers and stuff like that are on the ship. They have, there's areas where all these kids can play together and it's great. But sometimes the kids are like, I want to go to the comedy show, you know, and the parents don't know. The parents think to themselves, they're like, well, it's got to be, they said family friendly. So they get, and I always say that. I'm like, I don't do balloon animals. So here we go. And you just have to cope with it. And sometimes, you walk a line and I'll have to throw these little tricks in it. I'm like, I'll say a joke and I go, I'm walking a tight wire here, folks. And I said, don't worry. These go right over the top of their heads. So that's what we're doing here. It's like old episodes of Scooby-Doo,
It's a good thing they're growing over their heads because they're only 4'8" 8 inches tall. Which, by the way, I was born in 81. So I grew up just after the comedy bubble burst. So I was at the tail end of the 70s comedy bubble where, to me, growing up, stand-up comedy was still everywhere. It was all over the TV. We knew who comedians were, throughout the 80s and into the early 90s. So for me, as a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, I would die to go see a comedy show. And I would pay attention because I was watching comedy and ingesting comedy because even at a small kid, I knew that I wanted to grow up to be a comedian. And so for me, I would love to sit in the front row as a 6, 7, 8-year-old watching a comedy show. My parents also probably, my parents let me watch comedy on TV, so they probably would have took me to a club if it advertised a clean show. And I was like, please, please, please let me go. So I can't fault some of the parents who had kids who are like, this will be fun to go. This is what I want. But also at the same time, I feel like a lot of them are just dragging their kids along because they think it'll be, it's Disney on Ice for them. They'll sit there and it's, a comedy show for a kid, a clean comedy show for a kid is just another iPad stick in front of the kids so they don't scream and cry for an hour. The thing is these people will bring their kids, they'll put them in the front row and then they'll go sit in the back. Yeah.
It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know what I mean? And so I don't know. It is what it is, man. It's part of the job. And I used to be frustrated with it, but now I can work with it. And, it just forced me to stretch my wings a little bit. My allergies are absolutely killing me. Kentucky is one of the worst states for allergies. It's amazing, man. I'm eating Zyrtec like M&Ms.
See, I've been blessed that I have no allergies. I do have now, I'm finding out I have adverse reactions to opiates, which means I can't take pain relievers because it causes more pain, which is weird because being from Baltimore and being allergic to heroin is like being from Boston and being allergic to racism.
Boom, boom, boom.
By the way, so you're talking about the cruise lines started adding more and more adult shows. How long ago was that that change from, doing only clean shows to start adding in more adult shows? Was that a recent decision, or was that some time ago?
Some time ago.
Okay.
This particular line, I think, had the comedy on the ships for about 6 months, and then they were just forced.
Oh, okay.
Forced to do it.
Because I was curious as to someone who's been doing cruise ships for a long time. You did them pre-pandemic, and now you're back doing them, even though the pandemic's still going. What have you noticed differently in cruise lines pre the pandemic? Which once the pandemic hit, and there was that one cruise ship that was, full of COVID. And everyone's like, oh, we're never going to do cruise ships again. And lo and behold, 2022, here we are doing cruise ships again. What safety protocols, what differences has that industry put in that you have noticed as being a, as they call it, entertainment guest?
Other than the fact that they were only at 50% and 30% in the beginning. And then you had to wear masks in public. You still had to be, vaxxed and stuff like that. But they did have some unvaxxed people. I think they were experimenting with that, but they never went with it. But you had to be vaxxed. You had to bring proof. But you had to wear masks in the common areas. You know what I mean? Like if you're out of your room, you got to wear a mask unless you're eating or drinking, So that was the only thing. And it was tough to make people laugh and have a mask on their face, And so it was just, but now it's the same now. It's the same exact thing. People are just out and about now, man, and so that's where we're at.
Yeah. Because here in Boston, we just released the mask mandates. So masks are strongly encouraged in certain places like public transit and the government buildings. And of course, businesses can require masks or not.
Sure.
And I was like, all right, cool. Masks are done. Where
right.
Mask rules are over with. I'm okay with it. If I'm on a crowded train, I'll put a mask on. But for the most part, I'm not wearing masks. And that's what I've been doing. But I'm also finding myself still getting incredibly concerned with my safety of it. And I've been lucky enough to never catch COVID the whole time. And now I don't want to catch it now because it's like, it's the last moment. I feel like it's embarrassing to catch it now. But, and also I have to worry about, like, if I get COVID, I work freelance. I don't have sick days. If I get COVID, I'm out of work for a week. I don't get that pay. I don't get to sit at home. Like my roommate, he got COVID and he just got to work from home and he still got paid that whole week, 2 weeks that he worked from home with COVID. I don't have that luxury. And that's a huge concern of mine. Do you feel the anxiety of worried about getting COVID and then passing it on to your daughter? Because I'm not a germaphobe person. I'll quote my friend Corey Rodriguez, who says he's not germphobic. He's just germ aware. And I'm becoming increasingly more and more germ aware, as he says. And it's filling me with a little of anxiety that I did not anticipate. And I'm lucky enough to not have anyone in my immediate circle that if I get them infected with COVID, it'll be life-threatening for them. It's just me and my financial. Yep. That's the problem.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not worried about it on the ships now. I mean, I've been boosted and vaxxed, everything. And so, plus I've already had it. I had it over New Year's, which was crazy because I was on the ship with Catherine and Kenna. We're staying in the same room together, sleeping all in the same bed. I ended up getting COVID and they didn't. So the last day or two of the trip, I had to be quarantined, and then I had to be in Miami in a hotel for 3 days, which they still haven't reimbursed me for. But anyway, that's another thing. So I had to do that, but it was amazing that they never got it. It's incredible. Neither Catherine nor Kenna has ever had COVID.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. You hear that story. Like, my roommate had it. I think both my roommates had it. I know one of them definitely did, and I think the other one got it from him, but I didn't. And of course, when I found out he had it, I was like, you're to stay in your room. If you come out to use the bathroom, it is to be masked. You're only ordering food. Right. I'll deliver it to your door. And because I can't afford to catch this.
That's right.
And again, I'm healthy enough to where I know I'll get through it, but it's the financials that I was so much more worried about than anything else. Like, I can't afford to take off from any of the small little jobs I have.
Well, here's the thing. That did happen to me. I lost 3 weeks of work. I was supposed to work on Norwegian for 3 weeks after that. and I ended up losing 3 weeks of work, which was substantial for me.
Yeah, no, that's a month's worth of pay.
I mean, it's substantial. And so, yes. And when you're talking about comedy, because in comedy, you don't make a steady wage. You make, I'm working this week wage. Yeah. And so those 3 weeks, they hurt, man. They were right in the beginning of the year. Cause I always front load and back load my schedule. Like in January, February, and March, I'll work a lot, maybe even in April. And then in May, June, July, and August, I kind of lay low a little bit so I can stay home for the summer and golf and stay with my family and hang out and do all that kind of stuff. And then, back out on the road in the winter months, And so taking that 3 weeks away was quite the bummer.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. But I'm just glad that, I'm glad I got it and it was okay. But it was a little scary the first few days because you never know if you're going to be one of those people that it really affects, or if you're just going to be one of those people that's like, I don't know, I had, it was like a cold and, wasn't much, you know what I mean? So,
yeah, you don't know how bad it's going to be because some people are lucky and it's a mild cold and some people are, incubated. I guess that just comes down to our just general human fear of the unknown. But all right, so we're talking about where you're at now with doing cruise ships. Actually, let me ask you this before we go backwards on things. Do you have somebody, management, assistant, or anybody who's taking care of all the scheduling, booking things, or do you and Catherine do those things yourself?
What do you mean for my comedy career?
Yeah, for your comedy career. Are you guys, do you have representation working with you about, is there representation for cruise ships? I don't know how somebody gets into cruise ships. Is there, are you taking and fielding all these calls and schedules yourselves? Or it's like somebody from the cruise ship is a representative that does all that scheduling and stuff for you? How does the actual scheduling of your working on ships work out?
Well, some people, don't have agents, but those are people that worked for the company for many, many years. And they have relationships with people inside the company. And so they're like, why am I paying somebody 10 or 15% when I can just make the calls myself, right? Because the cruise ships once you get in, it's really hard to get in because the money's good and there's no money in comedy clubs unless you're, a big name comic.
Yeah.
And so you can't make any money in a comedy club unless you're half famous or a quarter famous or you got a million Twitter people. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, the clubs are paying less now than when I was coming up. Like in the 90s, when I was headlining in the 90s, early 90s, I was making mid 90s. Actually, I was making like $2,500 a week. Now, you're lucky if you get $1,700.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And that's before it used to include airfare, it used to include everything. I mean, it was amazing, but now. Comedy clubs are just different. They don't do the advertising like they want the comic to do it all. They want the comic's social, and there's other things that go into it. So getting in the cruise ships is very, very difficult now because it's not a stigma like it used to be. It used to be like the cruise ships are where comics go to die. If that's where your career was, it was over. And I'm not going to say that doing cruise ships isn't a career. For me, it's like I'm going there to write material and pick up a check. And then when I come home, I'll work on my career. You know what I mean? Okay. And so that's, like voiceover, if, whatever, corporate emceeing, try to get, TV and stuff like that. So there's agencies that you have to get in with, right? So you have to have a certain kind of tape. And then those agencies are constantly pestering the cruise lines, because cruise lines, like everybody else, they want to keep it easy. Everybody likes the path of least resistance, right? So they use guys and gals that they've been using forever. And it's really hard to get in. But once you're in, you do need an agency. There's a couple agencies out there. Don Casino, they're probably the biggest. The agency I'm with is called Artist West. And it's a couple of guys that are comedians, but they've worked ships forever. And now they have a really, really nice agency. And they have they're great. They work for you. They take care of getting the contracts. They take care of getting your airfare. They take care of, getting all the stuff that I don't want to do, and it's worth it to me to pay somebody 10% to do. Okay. And so, if you have a problem or a beef, it's easy to call your agent and go, hey man, this is a problem. I ain't good with this, and then that way you're not the whiner. They are. So, but yeah, to answer your question, there are agencies and you can go solo too. Like at this point in my career, I could go, and just call them. Like at the beginning of the year, what they do is they go, send us your availabilities for the year. Well, 95% of the comedians are just go, I'm available the entire year, So then, yeah, like me, I don't work birthdays. I don't work holidays. There's certain golf tournaments and things like that I choose not to miss. Things, that's the truth. And things like that, so I kind of keep those things sacred. I only want to work a certain amount of weeks. I like to work about 10 weeks a year on cruise ships, which is great because then I can bring the family, 2-3 of them. And, I still pull a good paycheck out of them. And then, and I don't live on there because I'll tell you what, you can get addicted to that money and so what happens is after you put your veils at some point in November or December of the year before, you'll get an email with your offers. And some people will get 30 weeks offered to them. Some people will get 6 weeks offered to them. You know what I mean? And you can pick and choose which ones you want. And then they go from there. And then throughout the year, you'll pick up ones because people will cancel and stuff like that. But it's very simple. Like in mid-January, I had my schedule for the entire year.
Okay. Wow. That's handy to know. But also that answers my question because I didn't know if there was an agency that only did cruise ships, which sounds like that's what there is because I'm like, if you have your own personal agent or manager or person and they're trying to deal with Norwegian, Disney, all these, like trying to get that, they're trying to deal with all these different cruise lines and clubs and all that. I can imagine that's got to be maddening for the person in that position, but just to have, this is the agency that books all my cruise line stuff. I deal with them. They handle all the different cruise lines. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure for the cruise lines, it's advantageous for them to go to just one agency to get their comedians instead of having to deal with 30 different people representing 30 different people as well. Yeah. So that can be maddening. So that's good to know that business is organized in that way, and that makes it a lot easier for you. Yeah,
but there are some that have agents or managers that only have like 1 or 2 clients that work with the cruise ships, and but those people usually, that's kind of a long story. But getting into the cruise ships, it's essential to have an agent. It's essential. You're never getting in without one.
Yeah. So we've talked about where you're at now in the business. Let's go backwards and start about how you got into the business, because you started, like I said, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, watching the end of the 70s comedy bubble, where comedy was everywhere for me. And that's about when you started. You started in the early to mid 80s, right?
I disagree with you on this. Okay. I did start in 88. First time I went on stage was in 87. Okay. The comedy boom was was happening then.
Really? Okay.
I don't remember. I don't know anything about it being that way in the 70s, but I know starting in the beginning of the 80s, 83, 84, 85 is when comedy clubs started popping up throughout the country. And that was the best time in the world to come. When I started comedy, was the absolute best time in the world to start doing stand-up comedy, because there were more clubs than comics. You know what I mean? And there wasn't Comedy Central.
Yep.
So you would get these, gigs. You'd be so happy. There was certain chains. There was the Punchline chain that had like probably 13 clubs. They were ran by Chris DePetta and Ron D'Annunzio and a guy named Dave Montesano. And that was the gold standard. And they were out of Atlanta, but they booked these 13 clubs. Then there was, there was the Improvs, but there wasn't a ton of them at that time. Funny Bones were a big comedy club chain. And so if you could get with the funny bones and the punchline, you were dialed in. Then there was creative entertainment and a couple of other ones. But there were more comedy clubs than there were comics. That's where there was a lot of bad comedy. A lot of real, hacky people coming up and people that were just doing it because they could get a gig. And so, but then
Angel Salazar, excuse me.
But those went on for a long time. And it wasn't until probably early 2000s that comedy started to change in the clubs because of Comedy Central, and comedy got a little saturated, and the comedy clubs weren't, doing all the advertising. They weren't doing all this stuff. And then it just completely changed. But there was also another great thing about comedy at that time. Like when I was coming up, everybody wanted to have a sitcom, right? Mm-hmm. They wanted to have what Roseanne Barr had, what Tim Allen had, what then eventually Ray had, and what Kevin James ended up having. That was the natural progression. It's like the movie Swingers, that was the natural progression. And then you would, do comedy, try and base it on your life, right? And then you hopefully would get some great management and agency. And then maybe you got to Montreal and went to New Faces. And then after that, hopefully you signed what they would call a development deal. And then they would sign comics and they go, all right, here's $150 or $200 or $250,000. And then they would try and they would own you for a year and they would try to write a show around your comedy. And if it didn't work out, then you just got a big old fat check, And the year I ended up getting 3 of those, 3 consecutive years. And then the last year that I had one was the last year the big checks were written. After that, they just went, we're done doing this. And part of that was Mitch Hedberg's fault because he signed a $500,000 deal with Fox, and then he didn't do what he was supposed to do, which was right. He just took the money and made a movie and did heroin.
Yeah, the timing in my head's a little maybe different to you because you lived it, and I'm watching what I went through. I through those period was a viewer and an intaker of comedy, whereas you were a person involved with it. And I feel like always when I listen to it, it's like 70s to mid 80s was the comedy boom. That's when all the clubs started popping up. That's when comedy was all over TV and everybody was hot. And then the way it looked to me is like through the mid 80s to mid 90s, that's when comedy was around. It moved into sitcom, and that's when live stand-up started disappearing from the TVs. And for me, from mid 90s to like 2005-ish, other than Comedy Central, I almost never saw stand-up anywhere. And then, of course, around 2005, 2010-ish, that's when comedy started rebooming. And I think we're still in that renaissance of it. But so you started, you grew up in Kentucky. You started comedy in Kentucky. When did you decide to make your move to LA? Oh, you didn't start in Kentucky?
No, I grew up in Wisconsin.
See, I know you live, you and Catherine live in Kentucky and LA. You go back and forth. But I've always pictured both your accent and your demeanor as being southernly, gentlemanly, like gentle Southern person, not Midwestern.
Well, it's funny you say that because I grew up in Wisconsin, all right? And I was a machinist when I graduated high school because I just didn't plan. You know what I mean? I just didn't plan ahead. And I didn't know if I was going to go to college to wrestle or what I was going to do. But turned out I didn't do that. And then I became a machinist, and I was, just absolutely miserable, dude. Like, you could not hated a job and where my life was headed any more than what I did. I had a girlfriend that was annoying as shit. I had a machine shop job that I fucking hated. I was working 9 hours a day and then 5 hours on Saturday. And it was just crazy. And then the owner of the company that I worked for came up to me one day and he said, hey, Scott, me and my wife went to this comedy club that opened downtown. And we both thought of you. And I was like, oh, okay. He goes, yeah, you should go down and check it out. I bet you'd probably like it. And I said, okay. So I called my girlfriend. I was like, hey, I want, my boss told me there's this comedy club downtown. And it was called the Comedy Corner. It was Papagayos. And so we went down there and saw a show. We saw John Mendoza. Do you know John Mendoza?
I know that name, but it might be because I know the name Mendoza, which is a baseball player, and we have a show here in Boston called the Mendoza Line, which is named after the baseball player.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I'm just conflating all the versions of Mendoza that I know.
Oh, all right. Well, John Mendoza was a great comedian, real acerbic dude. He opened for Howie Mandel for years too. But he was the headliner, and then a guy named Manny Oliveira was the middle act, and there was a guy named Dobie Maxwell who was the opening act. And so we saw Dobie go up, and then we saw Manny Oliveira go up, and he was fantastic. And then after that, they said, hey, we got open mic every Monday. And my girlfriend was like, you should do this. And I'm like, really? She goes, yeah, you should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And I go, all right. So the following Monday, I went up on stage and just ate shit. And then the following Monday, I went up on stage and just ate shit. And that just went on for quite a while. And so, So anyway, then I started finding a little something. I was doing some impressions, doing some things like that. And then they asked me to be the house MC. And so I did it Tuesday through Sunday. And then I still had my machine shop job. But they were paying me like $200 a week. And I was like, yeah, I'm getting paid to do comedy. And so I did that for about a year. And I went down and auditioned for Ron D'Annunzio and Chris DePetta. And they ended up giving me a bunch of work. And then that was April 88. And then the first place I worked was all through the South, the Southeast. I worked, South Carolina, North Carolina, Jacksonville, Atlanta, Huntsville, Birmingham, so I got addicted to Southern women, and I had to go to a 12-step program for that. And so I ended up just, having a little bit of a Southern accent, and then doing voiceover. I started doing a lot of Southern stuff, and so that's why it's like that. So then, I was in LA for 28 years, and then we wanted to get out, and we ended up moving to Lexington because I knew a whole bunch of people here from doing a golf tournament here for years, charity golf tournament. And so that's how I ended up here.
When was the move to LA? Growing up, because, I started in Baltimore. I live in Boston. And to me, the reason I left Baltimore is because I wanted to do comedy in a city that was bigger and better than Baltimore. Because if you're doing comedy in Baltimore, the best you can hope for is being the best comedian in Baltimore. And Mickey Cucella already holds that title.
Right.
So why battle him for it? But I always knew Boston was a stepping stone to New York or LA for me. I knew that because I had a pedigree of 20 years of stand-up comedians to watch and to learn from growing in the industry. So starting out for you, someone in a small town, Wisconsin, and traveling and doing the road, when did it become apparent to you that you need to move to LA to further your career? And now that you have done that, would you still make that decision today?
I would think I was in probably 7th grade. And I just stood up in front of my family and I said, I'm going to move to California and I'm going to have a television show. Right. My mom's knitting. She's like, that's great, honey. And my dad's like, get out of the way. So, which is true. So I always, that's what I always wanted to do, and so I got out on the road and I was out there for about, 4 years. And it's always back then it was always, when are you going to move to LA? If you want to have a sitcom, you got to move to LA. I wanted to act as well. So I guess about 4 or 5 years in, I got a call. Hey, you want to submit it's probably 6 years in. You want to submit a tape to this show that's going to go on this brand new network called Fox. And it was called Fox's Comedy Express. And I said, yeah, and they okayed me, and I went out, and there was a comedy club there called Igby's that they shot it at. And I got out there, and I called a friend of mine who I know lived there, and I was like, dude, I'm coming out there to shoot this thing. And he's like, wow, man, great. He picks me up from the airport. We went down to this little restaurant in Hermosa Beach, California called Good Stuff. And we're sitting there and there's girls rollerblading by in bikinis and there's beach volleyball players all over the place and the weather's perfect. And I'm just like, wow, look at this, man. It's paradise. And he goes, we got an open room. And I said, done. And that's how I ended up moving to Los Angeles. And it was absolutely the best decision. I mean, I'd go back and do it 100 times. You know, it was, first of all, living in Hermosa Beach is heaven on earth, especially when you're a young kid. And I was one of the house MCs at the Comedy Magic Club in Hermosa Beach. And so it was fantastic. And then, you know, started moving up, getting auditions, getting representation. And then at a certain point, I had to move out of Hermosa Beach because it was too far away from Hollywood. And, you know, it all worked out, man. Started, you know, performing at the Improv a lot and doing, you know. And so then, you know, one night I went up in front of Mitch Hedberg at the Improv after he came back from Montreal and signed that $500,000 deal. And I went up and did a set in front of him at the Improv with the entire industry in the room, and I had no idea they were there. Presidents of networks, casting people, managers, agents, everybody. The best of everything was there that night. And a woman named Erin who booked the Improv, I found out recently, booked me on that show on purpose, and she changed my life. After that show, I had managers and agents calling me like crazy. The next day I met with all of them and I ended up signing with a big one and then went to Montreal and, you know, signed the consecutive deals. And unfortunately the shows never made it on the air. But it was amazing, man. It was amazing. I just got to the point after being there 28 years that I was ready to go. So yeah. That's the whole situation, but I didn't regret it at all. I loved it. It was the best.
Do you think with the way comedy is now with the internet and industry being all around more or less, like, I mean, there's so much film and TV, you know, movies and TVs made here in New England. Do you think for comedians who are starting out, is it still as imperative to go to New York or LA? Because I'll listen to people who are, you know, on my same level as comedy, and I'll hear them talking about stuff. It's like they'll you know, get a Netflix deal, and then I'll find out they've only been doing comedy 6 or 8 years, and I've been doing it 12, and I'm like, oh, it's because they spent their 6 years in New York where there's the opportunities are there. Do you think it's still that way where, or maybe it's just they're twice as better than I am, that's why they got it faster? But do you think the industry is all around, or do you still think if you want to make it as a comedian, your best bets to get noticed is New York and LA?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I would assume that it would still be good to go to New York or LA. I think you still want to be at the Comedy Store. You still want to be at the Laugh Factory. You still want to be at the Improv, you know, and in New York, you still want to do Caroline's and all the other clubs there. And that's where, you know, you can be as funny as you want to be, but if nobody's looking at you, you know what I mean? But you can do stuff on TikTok. You can do stuff, you know, on Instagram, things like that, and you can get your name out there. But I think it's still important to be able to go to a club in New York or LA. Plus, that's where your competition is going to be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you want to be able to compete, because when you're just playing out on the road, you don't know who you're competing against. You just don't, you know? You're just out there by yourself doing comedy, and crowds are like, we love you, and that's it. That's
a good way of looking at it. That's an experience I had, that you still need to be knowing what's going on around you. Like, there's so many people that stop growing because they don't have that hunger. They don't see what's going on around them. Like, I even see bigger name comedians who will do a Netflix special, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, dude, 400 people have already made these jokes. Why are you, you're the best of the best. Why are you still making these jokes? And it's because they don't have the hunger to go out and see what's going on and compete against other people. So it's good that you have that realization to see that's what's still important out there. And then, we'll wrap up with talking about your new business venture, because you are a part of the machine, and now I say this with endearment. You and Catherine, your wife, have decided to become part of the machine by launching the Big Comedy Network, which I'm completely fascinated with how that whole process is beginning, because like your wife, Catherine, works in the corporate world, creating businesses and stuff like that. I got nothing. I know none of that stuff. I grew up, a poor white kid in Baltimore City, where if my parents wanted to start a business, it was selling pit beef outside of their friend's bar. That's how we started business. You just opened up shop and started doing things. We didn't know anything about taxes or licenses or that stuff. So you guys are taking a big jump into that venture now. Let's start with why did you guys decide that you wanted to create your own network?
Well, Clubhouse. We started on Clubhouse last February, a year and 15 months ago. And somebody had told me about Clubhouse, which is that audio app. I know you're familiar with it. And so we started doing Clubhouse, and we had, Comedy Lounge was the original name of what our club was. And we had our talk show, me and Josh Sneed, and Catherine was also a part of that. And we just had people on, and it got popular, you know what I mean? And I had a lot of my friends that I known from the business, big name people that were like, yeah, I'll come on, man. And some great writers and stuff like that. And so, we worked hard at building that network. And so, unfortunately, the people that are the founders of that app, what we were hoping for is that we were going to start that thing on this brand new technology, and at some point the shit was going to go viral, and we were going to be on that first car, you know what I mean? And then go viral with it. And unfortunately that never happened. And whether it's mishandled by them or whatever the deal was, that just never happened. So after about maybe 9-10 months of that, maybe close to a year, and we were like, this ain't working. We're spending a lot of time on this thing working. So we're like, our friend Ewan and Catherine and I were like, let's start this, I want to do a comedy network, like all things comedy, like Bill Burr's thing. And so my wife, being the person that she is, corporate strategist, man, we just started going, and we were like, it'd be great to help people. Be great to get some podcasts of people that are underrepresented or not yet famous, or that we believe in and stuff like that, and give them that format. And then we're gonna do streaming. We're gonna do specials. We already have some really interesting people that are coming on too. We're not like, if you go to some of the other websites, you see there's a lot of mostly just white men, and so we're trying to do something a little different, inclusive, like what we did on Clubhouse. We had a very, very woman heavy and stuff like that. And so we have young filmmakers putting stuff on we have a licensing deal with Amazon. We have, with the audio networks and all this kind of stuff. And so we are just opening a comedy club in the JW Marriott in Savannah, Georgia. The soft opening is going to be in July, and the launch will be in August. And that'll be a once a month, 5 shows that week, every weekend on that month. It's like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 5 shows. And we'll be doing that once a month in that venue. It's a beautiful, beautiful $371 million venue, 14 bars and restaurants. It's right on the river in Savannah. It's called Plant Riverside. It's gorgeous. And what happened was, there was a cruise director that I worked with on Norwegian Cruise Lines. His name is Tyler, and he left the cruise lines, and he ended up working for this company. And he called me up probably about 8 months ago, and he goes, "There's no comedy in Savannah, Henry. You do this big comedy thing that you're doing, at that time is just Comedy Lounge." And he goes, "Put a club down here." So Catherine put together the business plan, and at the same time, we were just starting to build a big comedy network and conceiving it and finding the name. And then we recently just closed the deal. And so we're starting that, and it's going to be big comedy presents, at the district in Savannah. And so we're starting that all out, and I'm very excited about it. And that'll be a big part of, what we do. And hopefully we'll be shooting our specials out of there. And I have a lot of really good ideas about, we're super creator friendly too. A lot of these companies that take on comics, I'm not saying big comedies like this, or not big comedy, but all things comedies like this. I have no idea what there is, but I know some companies are not as creator friendly as we want to be. We want to let you own your stuff. We want to, take a percentage that is fair. We want to do the things that are, I'm a comic for 33 years, I don't want to screw anybody out of anything because I don't want to be screwed out of anything. And so that's all it is. We just want to help. We want to bring talent to the forefront.
That's great that somebody, and I don't want to be insulting when I say I'm out of your age, but you're somebody who's older and more experienced in life. It's far too easy for somebody of your age to look at the new technologies coming through and go, that's for the kids. And you did it. You embraced it. You became a part of it, which is always inspiring to meet other people who are open-minded enough to new things that they may not be familiar with or that may not be their bag. Like me working in the music industry for years, I've always said that I don't want to become the old guy working at a radio station that's going, music today is not as good as the music in my genre, my era. And I try to take that same attitude into other things. And when I can find someone else or find groups of people that kind of have that same mindset of, hey, just because it's new doesn't mean it's bad. And I think that's one thing that made me gravitate to Comedy Lounge. And I was, we both know Philip Wilburn very well. And I tell Philip the reason I stayed with Clubhouse reason as long as I have is because of the Comedy Lounge and Big Comedy Network. You guys literally created a very inclusive network. Like it was the big joke that, we kept saying that there's no hierarchy here at the Big Comedy Network or the Comedy Lounge, but then it's true. It was true. You kept saying a lot, but there was no hierarchy. Everybody's involved. And, I'm glad that I found you guys and got to be a part of it. And I've learned a lot listening to the people that you guys brought onto the show and, just talking to everyone and being involved with all the other comedians and people who were involved in it. And you guys really did put together a great, cool, fun thing. And I'm glad to see that it's expanding. And I'm glad to see that you guys also know business better than I do, because I would have the same dreams to do the same thing, but not be able to pull it off. I could never pull off anything corporate, like anything that needs paperwork. I'm no good at.
You're speaking to the choir here. Dude, I appreciate you saying that too, because it was so nice to be able to, I was lost not hanging out with comics during COVID. I was just lost. And then when this came up and we started building this and I learned a lot through it and I got a lot out of it. And, I couldn't start this big comedy on my own either, dude. My wife is a brilliant person. And, we have also another consultant that we're working with who's a savant. And so this is not something that, I had my take in building this network, and I still do, but the base of this house is being built by Catherine and our consultant. And, a part of a base was me on Clubhouse. So I'll take my ownership in that. But when it comes to the business stuff, my wife is responsible for that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. And I mean, when I say you, I mean the two of you, because she's literally your right hand in so many things. Like almost never are the two of you. It's amazing how the two of you are always on Clubhouse at the same time in the same room on two different phones, when it would just sometimes be easier, the two of you talking into the same phone, but you're both there. You're both very present and paying attention. Oh, that's right. Because you have the Big Comedy Network account in there as well.
Yeah, that's the iPad. Yes. So, and then Philip Wilburn would always laugh because he'd be like, he'd do an impression of me. He goes, "There's no hierarchy." And he'd do that. And then he would say, "Catherine, mute your phone." Like, it was just great. It was so fun because we met so many great people like yourself. And now hopefully we can all build Big Comedy Network together. By the way, if you want to go to Big Comedy, go to I Love Big Comedy it's like at I Love Big Comedy, and I'm at Scott Henry Comic.
Yes,
So,
follow all the
that.
social media things because, no pun intended, but the Big Comedy Network has big things out on the horizons there. So, I'm obviously. We haven't been, I guess by the time we release this episode, it'll be officially announced that this podcast is also going to be on the Big Comedy Network, which I'm excited to be a part of. We're taking care of all of those logistic things, and your wife, Catherine, is holding my hand through all the paperwork that I keep getting overwhelmed by.
Yeah, it's
because like I said, not good at paperwork. Like I was writing down questions by hand and my hand started cramping up because that's how bad I am at writing things.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And then my hands all over the place.
Mm-hmm. And final question on that, since we talked to network and we're talking about hands, how do you do your notes for comedy? Because everyone has their own particular style. Like, what's it? Jerry Seinfeld only writes on yellow legal pads. He has, a mile-high stack of all the legal pads he keeps. I write on different stupid notebooks. Each one's different than the next. And then I have to only write with the right particular type of pencil, or there's only one type of pen I'll write with. And then, of course, I put so much stuff in my phone. So you're a phone guy. See? Yeah.
No,
you got into the technology stuff. I'm all over the place. I write on notes on app in the phone. I write in books. I write on Post-it notes. I have so much unorganized note-taking.
Well, what I do is I write the ideas in here in the notes, and I go, oh, hey, and I voice it in there. And then when it comes time to write things, then I take out a pad. That is, and I can only write effectively writing it down. I do the same thing as what Seinfeld does. That's the way I do it.
Are you precious about what you write on? Like I said, I can only write with a certain type of pencil and a certain type of pen.
I like to do these, except bigger ones like this, and then I'll put the ideas. And
those are field notes?
I'll just take these index cards, and especially when I'm out, and I'll write the idea on there. I'll write a couple of different thoughts I have about it. I'll put it on my mirror on the cruise ship and put it up there and think about it. And then I will take a pad of paper, and then I'll start writing it, but I keep that up there. I keep that up there to constantly refresh and look at it and know that it's in my mind. You know what I mean? Like I'll be like, oh yeah. What was and then, I'll just be driving and be like, oh, and then I try and throw it out on stage, and I'll bring, like a big one of these, and just bring it on stage with like big letters on it. And I'll just tell them, I go, this is new stuff. If, y'all are good, we'll try some. And if y'all are bad, we'll still try some.
And putting the index cards on the mirror so you're constantly looking at it, refreshing and thinking about it, and it's there present in your mind is such a good idea. Yeah. Oh, I should start doing that. There was a time where I kept a dry erase marker in the shower, because then I would get an idea. I can just grab the marker and write on the tile what my idea was, because we both know all our best ideas come in the shower, and we can't write soggy notes.
Yep. It's that, and when I'm, when you're sleeping. And so now I wake up and write it down, period. I've forgotten 1,000 times more jokes than I've ever written. And that's tragic.
Yeah, that's our nightmare is I have this great idea. And then
you're like, oh, I'll remember that. And then you don't.
That's our ever living waking nightmare. All right, Scott, it's great having you on. It's great hearing your story, because I hear bits and pieces of it when we were doing things on Clubhouse. And it's nice to hear all of it put together and condensed. And I think any of the people who are listening to this that are like me, aspiring to be more involved and have your career more full time, heard a lot of good things, especially with the cruise ship things, because I'm glad that the stigma of cruise ships is where comedians go to die is no longer a thing. Because when I heard about, I get to sit on a cruise ship for a week and do comedy, and they're going to pay me, and then I get to do buffets, that sounds like a dream to me. That sounds like an awesome thing. Why wouldn't anybody want to do that? That sounds like, I talk to comedians who talk about, the road is such a lonely place. You're always by yourself. You're meeting new people all the time. You're having the same conversations over and over. you're always by yourself having to figure things out. I'm like, that's how I live now. Like, that sounds like my absolute dream. Just get in a car, go somewhere, meet a hotel desk person, chat with them for 10 minutes, learn about them, find out some of their lively things, and then go to your room, watch TV, go out, go to a restaurant. Like, I do so much stuff by myself as it is already. It's not that big of a change for me to do it in a different city. So this is why I think I'm driven to the business, is because everything that people think is a nightmare sounds like an absolute joy to me.
The cruise ships can be a grind, man. It can be a grind, but you have to make yourself a schedule. I write out a schedule that I tape on the mirror. It's like, all right, go eat breakfast, come back from breakfast, write a little bit. And then once my food settles, I'll go to the gym. I get back from the gym. This is going to sound like a 9-year-old, but a lot of times I'll just chill for a bit, take a little nap. Then I'll get up and listen to some podcasts or, do things like that. Then I'll sit back down and do some writing. You have to keep a schedule, and it's hard, man. There's some stuff to it, but there's worse ways to make a living. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you've got it figured out and it's working for you. And you know what? It's glad to hear like somebody, me who lives with obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of my life has to be regularly regulated and scheduled and stuff. And if I deviate from it, all chaos breaks loose. Right. So it's nice to hear that somebody who can also live their life scheduled, not in an obsessive needs medication way like me, but can do it properly. So it was great having you on. It was good to listen to the full history of you getting into comedy because, you've been a good guy, and, Catherine, part of the reason why you're a good guy is because you surround yourself by good people as well. You've obviously been influenced to be a good people by those who are surround you. So thank you much for making me feel always included and welcome and being on here and telling everyone your story, Scott.
I appreciate it, Dennis. And it was so great to, make the relationship through Clubhouse. And it was great having you come on and do stand up. And those days were always a lot of fun, man. And we're going to grow another business. Let's grow this one into something really special, and then we'll all be a family. Well, hopefully we're going to have a whole bunch of podcasts, and, at one point we're all going to meet somewhere and have some drinks together and get to know each other and be able to use our family, together. It's going to be great.
Sick of